because the Titanic was never, ever, ever intended to make the crossing intact. It had to go down. It was a ritual. It was a death ship. From the day it was put on the drawing boards, it was designed to be a death ship. Why? What's the purpose? Who would do such a dastardly thing? How could anything so monstrous and so huge occur? And what would be the point? Because America at the time had just had a huge financial crisis in 1911, and government offices had closed. They hadn't been able to pay their bills. They'd been stretched out, war in the Philippines and other things. They weren't getting the job done. 2 years earlier, in 1910, in April, 7 of the richest men in the world, cumulatively altogether, the single richest block of money in the world at the time, got together at a place called Jekyll Island, and they mapped out a plot. They looked at who was in opposition and how they had to go about this, what they needed to eliminate in order to create a new bank of the United States that they could control and get interest from. The end result of that was this event, which had already been planned for prior to that. This was just a interim planning session to make sure they had all the dots and tittles in the right place, leading up to the 1913 vote on Christmas Eve. What a Christmas present, to create the Federal Reserve Board, a private entity, no more federal than Federal Express, which would create and manage America's money supply and charge us interest for managing our money, just paper. They don't provide any gold backing. They don't provide any real management assistance, except that it's their take. It's their VIG. It's a bunch of mobsters. Bloodline, family, European monsters. Mostly out of the city of London. J.P. Morgan at the time was the head of the Morgan banking interest, largest bank in the U.S. During this crisis in America, he personally guaranteed money to keep the government going and help them through this while we worked out a solution. Really? So America keeps getting buried in debt to these foreign bankers. This ship, the Titanic, the White Star Line, which, by the way, is code for Sirius, the Dog Star. The White Star Line is owned by Morgan. And the Titanic, being this ship, was set up as being the very, very finest ship ever to float the oceans, the most magnificent, the unsinkable. And Morgan was scheduled to get on the ship leaving London a couple of days previous and cross the Atlantic with others who were the richest American businessmen of the time. The plan was that they could talk during this voyage and try to figure out what they could come up with as a solution to eliminate these banking crises that were happening over and over. John Jacob Astor, arguably by many people the richest single man on the planet at the time, an American, who opposed a national bank of a type that eventually became what we call the Federal Reserve. Ivan Strauss, Benjamin Guggenheim, other businessmen cumulatively together representing the largest single block of American businessmen and wealth in the country, and men that were very opposed to this European orchestrated central bank. They were all going to be on the Titanic to talk these things over, try to work through a solution that was acceptable, that then could be pushed politically and brought to pass, so we wouldn't have these monetary crises and government crises, government employees not getting a check and having to go home. That wasn't acceptable. So when they got on the ship in London, J.P. Morgan's bags, his servants, everything had been brought to the boat, loaded on. He was all ready to go. Everybody was anxiously awaiting his arrival. And of course, being a bit of a diva, he was going to arrive, at the last minute because he's such an important person. And then with very short notice and only a few of the people even on the boat realizing it had happened, apparently he had other things that came up and he couldn't leave suddenly for these very important meetings on the boat and had to stay behind. The boat left the dock and these people up in the first class section were shocked to find out that he wasn't on the boat. And it was continuing on their way. They're not, they had no clue their problem that they're on a death ship. And the cruise goes on. The reality is that they were intended to be baited there. It was always intended to be bait onto this gilded cage, to be taken out into the North Atlantic and sunk in a ritual in order to secure their position to get control over America. When the Titanic, sailing at full speed, crashed into the iceberg, one of the other interesting features is that it had a very small rudder, so it wasn't able to turn as quickly as would have been intended. All it needed was a heading and some heading information, steered right to the iceberg. If the iceberg hadn't taken it out, the sub there, according to many, was present in the area to give it the coup de grace. But that wasn't necessary. One of the other things that isn't known is the Titanic sitting on the bottom of the ocean right now. It's not the Titanic. It's not even the ship you think it is. It's the sister ship, the twin, the Oceanic. And great research has been done, fantastic research has been done, multiple people documenting very meticulously, including with photos, that the Titanic was swapped with the Olympic. Why would you do that? Because the Olympic, which was the first of the two ships to be built and was more advanced along in its construction process, while it was under testing, had hit a British military ship coming out through a clearing leaving the harbor, and put a huge gash on the forward starboard bow of the ship, about 300 feet long. It had been taken to a shipyard and repaired, but the repairs weren't done with the highest quality steel. It was done with cheap pig iron, and which would buckle much more easily. It's much more fragile. And so that pig iron on this huge gash at the waterline made it a very fragile ship in reality. When that swap was taking place in the shipyard, there's photographs of the swap actually occurring, the two ships, and then all of the badging from the Olympic and Titanic were swapped. So now you have a much more fragile ship going out as the Titanic, all ready to go, that's already crippled. When that ship went out across the ocean with all of those business people and then other blood sacrifices to that altar position to be taken down, this was these wizards' plot, this plan to get control over America. It looked so relatively minor, innocent, a huge tragedy of the day. Nobody understood the leverage it had on the fate of America, even up to this year, right now, 107, almost 8 years later.
Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation. and I care not who makes its laws. Mayor Anselm Rothschild, 1790.